All right, I think we should be good to go. Let me just go ahead and click appropriate buttons here. All right. Apologies for the lateness of getting things kicked off here. I'm trying to get it started a little bit earlier, but I was doing a bunch of stuff the other night that involved me changing a lot of cables around, and I'd forgotten just how terrible that is. But we seem to be good now. I think everything's at pre-tests seem to indicate that things are working the way that they should. I'm just, checking my various monitors here. So I think we're going to say we're good to go on that. And we're going to go ahead and do that and say, hello, fellow Sublime Text Fanatics. Welcome to tonight's live stream. And I would like to point out before we really get anywhere at all in this that it is ridiculously windy outside. So there's some small modicum of chance that the power might go out or something if the windstorms persist. It wouldn't be the first time that something like that has happened. And fortunately, all of the Game Boys are charged up and ready to go, but you can never be too sure. So fingers crossed that that doesn't happen. And don't really have, because of stuff that has been going on, video preparation. I'm working on new thumbnails and revising video titles and descriptions and tags and all of that stuff. I haven't had as much time as I would like usually to think of a topic for the stream per se, but we're going to go ahead and just ride on anyway because we are doing some videos on the other channel, which is linked in the description. So if you're not subscribed to that, you may want to hop in there. We're doing those videos on color schemes. I thought that I would revisit something which I have previously streamed in a live stream way back in live stream number 6, November 4th of 2018. So that has been over a year again. Hello, Ashwin. So we'll see how I do on that. If you have any questions about this stuff, make sure to ask because I am preparing to the final points for the next video in the series on the other channel where we're going to talk about either color specifications or rules. I haven't decided which one of those I'm going to tackle first. I have to see how many points they are. I'm trying to get these videos down to 15 minutes or less, but it seems like there's a little bit too much information in there. Before we get to that part, I might point out that for some reason, Chrome on an Android tablet does not respect the font size that you set, regardless of what you set it to. So the tabs on my Chrome on the little tablet I have down here to monitor the chat are like this tall, but the writing is still sort of small. That's a little bit lame. But let's go ahead and jump on into getting some stuff done here. Now let me just see. I have to click the appropriate thing over here to say what I want. Still getting used to OBS here and working it in this particular manner with. Normally I would use keystrokes, but I got a whole lot of stuff going on here now, still getting used to it. Although I am pretty happy that I managed to compile my own version of it from source a bunch of times, and it still seems to work, presumably, because that panel over there is telling me that it's totally streaming. I was a little touch and go there, but I think I touched on that in the introduction to last week's stream. It's not as nice as one might think to compile some of this stuff sometimes. But all right, here we go. Now, when that played last week, I don't think it made any noise. I heard it in the monitor, but I didn't hear it in the stream when I watched some of the playback afterwards. So I think something awful happened while I was fiddling around with those sound properties I was talking about. One of the things I was trying to do was get VSTs to work under OBS in Linux. To be able to apply the same sorts of audio corrections to the headset audio that I do when I'm using it to record videos, so it sounds a little bit better because it's a gaming headset, so it's got excuse me, great noise reduction at the expense of thinking my voice is noise. But that did not go as well as expected, despite the couple of days I spent compiling and recompiling and investigating things. I managed to get it to compile and then explode. But I think I may have fixed that now. Now, the first thing, before we get anything else going on here, I want to do this because we are going to push out a new release of Override Audit. Now, this is an example of a font that seems like it might be excessively large. Okay. Last seen 2 hours ago. We might get lucky on this one. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to open the repository for Override Audit where I have prepared uh, all of the changes for a version 2.2 of Override Audit, which are things that I've been sort of sitting on for at least a month and a half, 2 months now. Everything seems to work fine. And I realized the other day when I was answering a question for someone on the Sublime forum that I almost told them to use a command that only I have access to. So I think it's time to push out tag for 2.2.0. That's going to be the thing that allows GitHub, or sorry, pushing it to GitHub. That's going to be the thing that allows package control to see that that is a new release, and we'll go ahead and push it to my other origin as well. And with that out of the way, we need to come back here very quickly. So that says it was last seen 2 hours ago. If I did everything right, fingers crossed, we should see a new release popping up soon. But what we do have to do is go to GitHub and then search for Override Audit like so, and find the releases tab where I can look at draft releases like so, and tag it. Woo, no, don't do that. My bad. I do this so infrequently. I need to release packages more, don't you say? Tag version 2.2.0 at target stable. And there's the release notes for that. And we're going to go ahead and publish that up. So we can see here what are the changes, the ability to open a resource, and some, actually, I can't remember if, I don't think this hover pop-up thing is actually something that was implemented in a stream. I know the open resource was. I'm pretty sure it was anyway. This one, fix an issue where some commands wouldn't properly reload after a package update. That's a thing we discovered in last week's stream, where we were, or actually maybe last week or the week before, I can't remember, when we were working with context menu stuff, and oh no, that was the context menu thing. In that particular stream, there were some issues there. The plugin didn't properly reload because there was an item missing. So that is officially out now. So in theory, when the next time we come and look at this, if it says 1 hour, or it cycles back around and the crawler goes back through all of the packages, the version should jump up to version 2.2. Also, nice to note that Will fixed a bug in the package control website. The package is supposed to only support Sublime Text 3 because of basically I didn't want to create a TM language syntax definition. I wanted to use Sublime syntax. So there's a minimum version that I originally used that hit that particular version. Indeed, yes, there are some. Well, I'm not actually sure how many of there's some API things that I think are new for 3.8 only, and I think the other ones are also available in the new one as well. That's actually one of the things that's covered in here, just because I'm not sure that we ever actually pointed it out. 'Cause I can't remember if I did it in a stream or not, but one of the things that has happened in one of the more recent releases of Override Audit, and by recent I mean like November, is if you hover the mouse over top of a package name in a package report, a diff report, anywhere where there's a package name, it shows you this pop-up that tells you the name of the package, what version it is, which for packages that ship with Sublime is the version of Sublime that package comes from. I may or may not be running the wrong version of Sublime right now. We'll have to fix that in just a second. And then, no growling, buddy. Got a dog under the desk. Then other things like if it ships with Sublime, is this a package that ships with Sublime? Does it exist as a folder in the unpacked package folder? All that stuff, which is sort of what we see here. But one of the things that's also in here now is this indication of a Python version that plugins would be using if they were if they're running in here. And this detects if a package has plugins in it, and it only displays that if there are plugins. So we can see CSS, C++ doesn't have, this package doesn't have a line in the hover pop-up that says Python. That means this package doesn't have any plugins in it. But Automatic Package Reloader 33 does, and it's running in Python 3.3, and Automatic Package Reloader does, and it's running in Python 3.8. Let's just check here, because I think, well, no, this has to be the new version. So, that's interesting. Oh, I know why. I know why that's the case. There, let me push this button. There we go. I forgot. That might be related to, there we go. Now it says version 4062 and 4062. Yeah, I was doing some stuff in regular Sublime Text 3. This information is actually cached in settings in the view. Actually, this is executable hash is not available for build 4062. Are you sure? This is Python 4062. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. If it's in here and undocumented, that doesn't mean that it's, I should point this out, this doesn't mean that it's for the new thing. It just means that it's something that exists in the sublime.py file or the sublime plugin.py file, but it's not in the official API documentation. I haven't updated HyperHelp to have any of the new stuff yet. So this is actually something that would in fact work in an older version of Sublime. As a matter of fact, curiously, if we were to run version 2, it may even work here. I'm not entirely sure. HyperHelp certainly won't. Okay. Assuming I spelled it right, it doesn't work there. But this version of the Sublime Text that I used for my sandbox stuff would be, let's see. This is 3176. Now, it totally exists in this version. There are some items that have, oh, yeah, that's okay. And then we'll pop on back to the appropriate version here. I happen to have, as a matter of fact, the changelog for the initial build right here. We'll throw in a new tab because I'm carefully shepherding that thing. And Python, there's a new environment for plugins. API section for details. Let's skip down there. Boop, 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 boo. I think all of these things that are listed here are just for everyone because there is a section here. Improvements to the API applied to the new Python 3.8 environment only. That would only cover this stuff. None of this is actually in HyperHelp yet, primarily because I generate the help from that manually. I don't have an automated process that generates the help for HyperHelp into its own help files. I actually have a job that checks every day to see if the official documentation has changed, and if it has, then I can go in and tweak anything that might have changed. So I'm always on top because the version of the document that they have isn't, well, it might be machine parsable, but web stuff isn't really my bailiwick. And since I was mostly pre-writing it anyway, and it's just sort of a copy-paste operation and had to be reformatted, I did it that way. So there isn't any stuff for the new version yet, but that does remind me that there is something to fix in that particular regard. And we'll go ahead and close that. Is it released yet? No. All right. It might take a minute. there is some stuff that needs to change in here. But getting back to what I was saying, Ashwin, you were asking in the forum if there's a way to persist information so that it's available from run to run. And settings is used very heavily in override audit. All of the information that's available in this pop-up here comes from settings that are stored in this view right now. So when a report gets generated, there's a bunch of settings that get applied in the background here that tell it all of the information that it might need for what it's doing. So all of the packages that appear in the list have this sorts of information available in them. So I find that very handy, just for the reasons I mentioned in the forum post. It's just automatically persisted as long as this view exists. Then that information is just always available in the settings. It's not something that would happen if you had like a global in your plugin, for example, because if you had a global in the plugin, then when the plugin reloads, that goes away, which causes you no end of problems while you're developing the plugin in the first place, but could also run into other issues as well. Um, so I use that pretty extensively. View settings, something I didn't mention in the, or maybe I might have sort of basically touched on in that answer to your question in the forum, is that you can use any setting name you want, but it's generally a good idea to do something to namespace them, if you will, because settings are just something that's shared by all plugins everywhere. So if you created a setting called Bob and some other package created a setting called Bob, then there could be some weird interplay there. What I do in HyperHelp is and in override audit is prefix all of the settings with underscore HH or underscore OA or something like that, because that seems like something that's probably not going to be used by anybody else. Another thing that you can do is use the name of your package and then a dot and then the name of the setting. That's sort of what you would do, particularly if you were doing something like this. If you had a setting that for your package that was stored in the actual preferences file itself, for example, here, this particular setting is from HyperHelp for allow unpacked. And this isn't something you have to do. For a long time, this was HyperHelp underscore allow underscore unpacked. That's unlikely to be used by somebody else, right? But as we see here, package dev has special syntax highlighting support for settings that start with a period to call them out so that you know that this is actually a setting from a package. So I switched it a little ways back to use that. And I can't remember if I actually pushed that up anywhere or not. But that's just sort of one of those things. So I use that very heavily in HyperHelp to track information. All of the anchors that exist in this file, the text that you can jump to, are stored that way, and links store where they go that way, because that's the sort of information that's just always available. And that's why it's possible to have links that and anchors, or anchors specifically, that appear to be invisible, although I'm not sure if I'm actually using that anymore. Yeah, I think settings is one way. Depending on the data that you want to store, you could also do it in a file as well. There was somebody asked on the forum recently, they were doing something with settings in a plugin where their plugin was trying to find, I think the name was of executables, the location of executables that their package needed to auto detect, and they wanted to persist that, but they didn't want it to be necessarily in a settings file because then someone might fiddle with it. And one way, the ways we covered there was you can't really hide it, but you can sort of, security through obscurity hide it, if you will. A great example of that is how the C++ package that ships with Sublime has key bindings associated with it that only take effect in C++ and C, but there's no item in the preferences menu. Oops, I forgot I have a package installed. That doesn't work here. There's no package settings for C++ here. So you'd never know that there were key bindings there unless you used view package. Well, let's do it in this window. Unless you used a view package file and search for C++ key map. Maybe you might even use pluses instead of underscores. I think I moved my keyboard a little bit. There we go. Yeah. And there's totally a key binding file here that applies in C and C++ and includes. You'd never know that these key bindings were here if you didn't know to look for the actual package file. So suggestions to that guy was you could store your settings in a settings file in your package and then not include a menu item for it. Anybody that wants to find it could find it, but it's still easy for you to load that way. Or you could store it in a file of your choice. And that's where that whole thing of if you're going to store it somewhere, you probably want to store it in the packages folder or the cache path because those are paths that are readily available to Sublime by way of the API to find out where those locations are, and they're related to Sublime because users might not be happy if you just start dropping files all over their system, like on their desktop, without asking them, or things of that nature. And if you're going to do that, you should create a directory named after your package because you sort of own your package, if you will. There's nothing specifically set out that stops someone else that creates a package or a plugin from writing something into, say, the packages override audit directory, because why would there be? There's no way for it to know that that's not allowed. But generally speaking, you don't go writing files into packages that aren't yours unless you're the user. So I think his intention was to do something along those lines. And another reason, if you wanted to store settings, by the way, if you have custom settings, they always go into the user package. The save settings command always stores the settings file into the base of your user package. Something to keep in mind in that case is that a lot of users, myself included, sync their user package across all of the machines they're on and across different operating systems as well, so that the Sublime is configured the same way everywhere. And package control makes that really easy by automatically installing packages that are missing or removing them if they're no longer a package that you've installed, so that you can help keep those sorts of synchronizations happening. And in that case, you might not want to put something that's machine specific in a settings file like that because it might get synced and then used in the wrong place. So I think he might be doing that in a cache file or something along those lines. Not in the user package, though, possibly in his own package. Um, there's a lot of things about package development that are sort of best practices unofficially. No one's actually, there's not like a document as far as I know that says if you are going to do something, do it this way. It just sort of works out that way. Um, I think all of the people, based on the way that people learn plugins by looking at existing plugins to see how other people are doing things or asking questions in the forum, and we sort of all tend to follow the same sorts of logic for the things that we're doing. But that does remind me very quickly. If we jump into this, something that was pointed out in the Discord is that well, yeah, I guess that would be that way, wouldn't it? Yeah, that's just a long thing. If we open this, uh, is checked. Currently only appears under application command because the API documentation says that it's an application command only thing. But as was pointed out in the Discord, this actually applies to all commands, which I think that's something I might have noted in the past. Um, because all of the text command, the window command, and the application command all descend from one common command class, so that there's not a lot of redundancies in there. And I think I've looked at that in the past, so I probably knew at some point that is checked as something that's just in the base command class, so it's probably applicable everywhere. But I sort of probably had an assumption that because only the one is documented, Sublime will only call it for the one and not for the others without actually checking it. So might be an idea to tweak that up. So let's see if I remember how to edit help in this thing. So let's see. The first thing we would need to do is HyperHelp help. And we don't care about any of this business at all. We care about Snappy. Oh, and I already have at least some help in here. So API help for. Oh, what did I tweak in here? Oh man, That ridiculously wide. Oh, I guess I can actually tweak that down now. There we go. Having those really long, deeply nested file names makes the sidebar a little too big. So let's see. Oh yeah, I just fixed. I fixed that. So there's a couple of things that we actually. One thing we noticed in last week's stream that on input handlers that wasn't correct either. But the first thing to look at is, let's see, application command. Probably could have just used the command palette for that, right? We're gonna grab this out of here. Comes after is visible, right? So we would have text command and window command. So after is visible, something like that. And for text command, after is visible, something like that. But this should be that. And over in this one, whoops, this should be that. It should be the same, right? And I'm thinking, and I don't, well, if I had actually paid attention to that thing, if we jump to the executable hash, I'm using 2 spaces and then this. For the time being, and I kind of dread, Will mentioned that there's going to be documentation changes for the stuff that's happening here, and I have a bad feeling about how tricky it's going to be to synchronize Snappy back with the help after that happens. Whoops, I got way too many things open here. So let's, well, no. Text command, go in here. We'll throw that there because it's not technically documented. So I want to call it out as that here. That's sort of why I have that item in there. And we will window command this thing as well. And I think what we also need to do is modify this thing. So let's see if this works. Check that out. That's totally cool. I don't know that if this was when I did the video on HyperHelp Author. I can't remember if I covered the factor this or not, but it actually will lint your help files for you. So we can see here that is text command is checked, isn't found in the help index. That one there, and similarly, I need to hang on a second. I need to trim down the list of files in this thing because this is just ridiculous. Okay, let's see. You go away. You go away. And no. We're gonna keep you open for just a second. Oh no, we're not. We're gonna get rid of you. Text window help. Okay, so we want the lint. I don't care about that. Or actually, let's go ahead and just say, oh, well, wait, hang on a second. What's this? Oh, yeah, okay. That was a reminder to myself. We'll just go ahead and close tabs to the right. Make that a little bit nicer. Yeah. All right, that'll be a lot easier. Whoops. Honestly, okay, so yeah. So what we need to do here is find application command dot is checked. Now we can't have an alias on this anymore, I don't think, because if I remember my own help system correctly, and it's been a few streams since I looked at it, aliases need to be unique. Actually, I suppose for our purposes here, I suppose we could say try it out and see, right? So let's see what happens if we tweak up this one. I am not having a good night for typing right now. Let's reload the help. Okay, so if that was reloaded, then if we relint it, I wonder if I fixed that. Maybe aliases. What was? I think it was on my list of things to do. I guess I need to be in the help for that to work, right? Oh. Unless there was a warning here. Doesn't look like it. Man, I reloaded that a heck of a lot of times, or I have a problem. Let's see. Oh, yeah, that seems okay. All right. Oh, actually, I guess I didn't have the actual thing on there, did I? Because I took it out before I copied it. It's an important thing when you're testing to actually test the thing you think you're testing. Otherwise, it may not work as expected. Still okay, huh? Well, we'll see what happens. Does want event appear in multiple places? No, it doesn't. All right, well, we'll do what we have to do. Whoops, let's copy the right one, shall we? It goes after is visible. It goes here. Bum, bum, bum. And that should be text command. So if we went to here, there's 3 of them. Cool. That one's undocumented. Okay, so that's nice. Now the other thing was that whole what was it? It was the list input handler, wasn't it? In the description takes value and text. But I think the one for text input handler, the description method just takes text. And I don't know how that one got past me, but I think we should fix that while we're in the vicinity of making life better for everybody. So that was in list input handler. And it's value comma text, right? For that thing. Value text. Right on. And one of the other nice things about this is it automatically updates the header there. So that's nice. So that is out of the way now. Let's go over here just to see, has this been updated? No. All right. So that is good to go. Now the thing that was actually something I wanted to try to play with again, and is automatic generation of color schemes. That's actually something that, as I said, I've covered in a previous stream, but it was a long time ago. And it goes a little something like this. Help here has its own custom syntax associated with it. As we can see, if my webcam isn't covering it in that panel, it is a syntax of type help. And there's that whole interplay between the syntax definition and the color scheme where the syntax applies scopes to the text and the color scheme applies colors to scopes. So as a syntax author, if you use scopes that are not the standard, the norm, whatever you want to say that, then standard normal color schemes won't syntax highlight it because they don't have a rule to support it. So that's why there's guidelines for scope naming so that all languages say that entity name function is something that's applied to the name of a function, and entity name class is applied to the name of a class, and all that stuff. Those may or may not be correct because I'm not a huge syntax guy, which works great until you start working on something like HyperHelp where the syntax definition is sort of kind of not a programming language, and there's not enough standard scopes to go around, if you will. For example, we have anchors. That's these things here. We have links. We have inline code blocks. There are the header line is a special thing. Key bindings. Technically speaking, this orange value here on line 45, that was originally intended as key binding, or if you will, just the idea of some text, wrapped in that. You might want to use it for something like this, or as a key binding, or other things of that nature. The box drawing commands, which, whoops, I'm not sure. Actually, I guess they'd be in the build system help, right? If we were to look at, I'm not even entirely sure. Basic example, no usage. I would imagine there are some tables in here, so we can see examples of key bindings and stuff. Anyway, the whole idea of this business is, how do you create a syntax definition for something that's not really a programming language and is sort of but not really a markup language like Markdown. There are a few scopes that are related to that, but mostly they're structural in nature and not visual in nature like we're using here, because Markdown is something that gets converted to HTML. So there's not a whole lot of stuff that happens in that regard, but we do need to have scopes applied for syntax highlighting, and because scopes is how the navigation between links is ultimately powered. That's how we determine where links go and where links even are and things like that. And so what I'm doing here in HyperHelp is having a syntax that's using the wrong scopes, if you will. And I think we could probably even help syntax like so, but we'd have to look at it this way. So Hmm, interesting. I'm kind of surprised that that actually worked, because this should. Oh wait, I think I added a rule for this because I was tired of not being able to see it. But anyway, things in the header, something that's storage, things that are strings, that might actually be correct. Anything that looks like a key binding is a language variable, because I wanted something that was orangey in color, if you will. And in well, yeah, I just say it that way. I use Monakai, so I set out the scopes based on primarily what colors I wanted to use for the thing, at least initially. That's why, if we looked for storage in here, for example, the link scope is storage, because in Monakai storage is red, and I wanted links to be predominantly red at the time. And there's a storied history of HyperHelp as a whole, because it started off as a very simple system just to be as a part of override audit. And I had a proof of concept. I was sort of trying to implement a help system that's somewhat vaguely similar to how the help system in Vim works, because Vim's help is text files that are sort of, marked up with a syntax. Probably other editors too, but Vim's the only one that I really use with any regularity to be able to know that. I wanted something like that for override audit, and then the more I played with it, the more I thought, yeah, this could be handy for other things too. And then gradually over time, it rolled into what we have now, right? So there's been at least one major rewrite of this thing. My November project for 2017, I think, was completely rewriting from scratch HyperHelp, based on taking it from the format that it originally had when I was working on my proof of concept into this one. And along the way, it sort of started changing some of the scopes up in here along with everything else to follow the idea of, yeah, I like storage as a scope for links because it's red, but it's sort of related to storing, new a link to another location, and things like that. So it's sort of logical, or at least it was back when I wrote it, that these scopes are sort of correct. So even if you use a color scheme that's not Monakai, you still end up with something somewhat pleasing, because presumably anybody that's creating a color scheme is creating colors that work together, right? But the real holy grail of this would be to create your own color scheme. And historically in Sublime, that was like a big to do. The first thing that comes to mind is Sublime Linter, because prior to the implementation of Sublime color scheme files, there was no way to augment an existing color scheme by just adding new rules on, as we covered in this week's video on the other channel. You had to take a syntax or a color scheme from somewhere else and make a complete duplicate of it, give it another name, and then add rules or change colors as you needed. So, as a person that thought, I like Monakai, but I really wish the comments were a different color, you'd have to take the Monakai color scheme, rename it to custom Monakai or something along those lines, modify the thing you want, and then use that, and you're good to go. And then Sublime updates itself, and there's a new Monakai color scheme, and you don't have any of those changes because you're using a different color scheme. And if you wanted to use those changes, now you have to remember all the things you tweaked and how you tweaked them. Not great. Packages sometimes want to create their own color schemes to be able to do stuff. And the first one that comes to mind for that is Sublime Linter, because using regions to be able to outline text in the buffer and add items to the gutter area over here, which is what the linter in Sublime Linter does, requires you as part of the add regions call to provide a scope. And the scope that you provide tells Sublime what color to render the box or the fill or the squiggly underline or the straight underline in the case of, for example, links in HyperHelp. So if you wanted to have a red color for errors and a green one for warnings or something along those lines, then you need to know the scope of something that would be that color. How could you figure that out? The only way you could figure that out is to load the color scheme and scan through it and then find all of the RGB hexes and try to find one that's greenish. And kind of doable. What if a person doesn't have that a color scheme color that's green enough? Then what do you do in that case? You use something else, right? So it was very common to do things like if you're using Sublime Linter and you're using Monokai, then it would load up the Monokai color scheme, make a copy of it, add extra scope rules that use colors from the file or that it hard coded in there or both of those things, and then write that out as a file in your user package. And then when it creates the lint panel, it would just use those colors and things of that nature, which kind of works and is kind of a pain in the butt because you end up having files in your user package and you get into that whole, if I change my color scheme, then that file has to be recreated. Does the other one go away? How does that work? So it's a lot nicer now because you don't have to create a whole complete color scheme from scratch. You could, and you can even do that based on the colors of the color scheme that's currently active if you wanted to. But you could also just say, if the user of this package is using Monokai, then we'll just create a Monokai Sublime Color Scheme file in our package directory that adds the scopes that we want, and then everything will just color the way that we're interested in, right? Um, so I played around a bit with that in a previous stream, and it's been a while since I've done it. There's still some issues with it that I'm not 100% happy about, and one of them is that whole I don't want to leave files dangling around in the user's package, but if they were in the package, if you will, then that might not be as bad as all that, right? So how could we go about doing that? And the answer to that sort of is this. This and or this. Viewstyle returns basically a dictionary that gives you every style setting that's available for the current view, but all the colors are normalized into RGB hex values. So you'll lose the variables. If you use HSL, you lose that, but you get information. So we could say view.style, for example. And that's going to give us all of the sort of the global type colors, if you will. I should say I may have, overstated that. Excuse me, we know the background color for Monokai is this hex. The color of a block caret is this. The color for scroll highlights is this, and line highlight is this color. That's the line that this whole thing gets. And I think there's even a gutter foreground highlight, which is that color there, which used to always be foreground color, and now in newer builds is not, and all this great stuff. So one thing you could do if you wanted to be able to know information is do that, and you can pull out all of the style information. You can also use style for scope as well, and you get more dialed in information. So if you said view style for scope, say comment, then we know that in this color scheme, comments are not bold, they're not italic. This is what the foreground color is, and this rule is coming from the file packages color scheme default Monokai Sublime color scheme from line 50 column 26. So you can even dial into that level of stuff. So we can see what the foreground color for any particular scope is, and we could pop in multiple scopes here. I think we could say comment line, is still going to provide the same thing, even though there's not necessarily a rule for that because of the way that scope matching works, which is one of those things that's going to be covered in one of the upcoming videos. We'll comment documentation and stuff. So we could say the style for scope entity.name is this. Now this is interesting. This just occurred to me now. If I did this, I don't think this might be something we should report on the issue tracker. If we looked for this, and that's not going to be an example of it, is it? No. This one. Oops. Oh, come on, fingers. Meta.function.python. Oh, maybe I was doing it the other way. Let's actually check the color scheme, shall we? Because there's a new glow effect here. And it is... Comments are reddish, are they? Oh, yeah, that's right. I was trying a thing and it didn't work. If you were watching in this Discord earlier, I was playing with some stuff, but that doesn't work. Source.python. Yeah, entity.name. So this doesn't return the font style for glow, only bold and italic. So maybe that's something that needs to be reported because there is another font style there. So that's interesting. But nevertheless, we could use this to grab the information for things. And if we were actually to look for background here, we could see if we did this thing for the scope invalid, maybe if we actually use the scope and not the name, we can see that it also includes a background color in there. Background isn't always included, only if this thing actually has a background on it. So if that was the case, what if you wanted to write something that needed custom scopes in some manner, like you had a help system or a package report or something like that, and you wanted to actually use correct scopes for your own language, but there's not a rule for those in color schemes. So instead of links being given the scope storage, they could be given the scope link. You could, in theory, use this to figure out what scopes you should write into your own little file, and then you could go from there, right? And then again, you lose some of that ability to know the actual HSL values. You just get the RGB hexes. But if you're just always regenerating that file and it's not something that a person should be looking at manually, then that doesn't really matter, I would think. The other way you could do that is to use sublime.load resource, and then you could provide, like packages, color scheme, default, Monokai, .sublime color scheme, and grab the whole thing out as a string. And then you could say sublime.decode value and get it as a dictionary. And then you'd have that sort of information. But then you might also want to use sublime.find resources. Monokai, oh, excuse me, there's no S on that. Sublime color scheme, like so. Oh, maybe there actually is. That's right, it's a list. To find all of the files, and then you have to load not just the one that's the default, but also the one in the user package. And then you need to be able to take that dictionary and apply it on top of the dictionary you loaded before. Items in this list are spat out in the order that Sublime loads them. So whatever this thing returns, you could grab all of those, turn them into dictionaries, cram them together. Then you have one master dictionary that represents the entirety of this color scheme as it's known across all of the resources. And then you could scan through that file to find the rules that you're interested in, being able to match, so you could actually grab the variables or the color specifications that they're using. Might be handy. You might not even need to do that for, augment things like that. It might be it might be a good idea to do so, but it's not technically required. Things might not look correct though. Um, so let's go ahead and how do we want to pull this off for playing here? I think what I did last time was use a sandbox copy of Sublime, but I don't have my sandbox script set up to work with the new builds yet because the directories they extract have different names. They don't and things like that. So maybe we won't do that, but let's say we said new syntax and wow, this thing has gotten exciting. Um, let's say no file extension. I guess we could leave this in here, but then, the scopes will just automatically work out, right? So we might say text.sample, let's say. And let's say we have a list of words that we're interested in matching. And it's probably not the best way to do that. For or in or while or do or end or begin or repeat, let's say. That seems like a goodly number of things, and we can apply those to the scope. Words.fancy. Yeah. Let's say that's enough to get us going for now. We don't need a giant thing, right? And then we want to save this. Now, let's say for our purposes, we create a new thing called, oh, actually, I might already have a sample package in here. Do I? Is this actually sorted correctly? Yeah, no, I must have gotten rid of it. Okay. Sample. And we'll go ahead and save it in here as sample.sublime syntax, like so. Okay, I'll click the button then. I'm okay with that. Then we can say scratch buffer prop% sample and jump it over here. So we did that. That's all just regular text, and the scope is text.sample, right? And then if we said for a while I did something in Mexico, you can see this has a word.fancy and that has a word.fancy, and this one would be a word.fancy. This is the prime example of the syntax is applying a scope, and the syntax gets to apply whatever scope it wants because it's the thing that knows how to recognize the language of the file. The color scheme doesn't know that it needs to highlight something with that particular scope, right? Let's go ahead and even add one more thing in here. We'll do the same sort of action. And we might say, oh, the. Yeah. This one's just a word, but those ones are fancy words. And I would imagine the in the hotel in Mexico, right? So now this one's just a word, but this one is a fancy word, right? So if I opened up this and wanted to add a rule in here, I could say that if I scoped the word word with the foreground color, say var red, then regular words are red. And then we could say that fancy words instead are blue. Oh wait, there's not a blue variable in this thing. Shoot. Orange? No. Cyan? No. Yellow? That's got to be a thing. Oh, right, but maybe I don't know how color schemes work as much as I thought I did, because that should, oh, my bad. Who noticed that? Here we go. Lordy me. There we go. That's what we wanted originally. So there we go. And the reason this works the way it does, by the way, is actually, I guess I probably need to do this because I can't. It's been a while since I used this. Scope name, scope selector. Match the selector against the given scope, returning a score, right? So if we did score selector, and the scope that we were looking at was words dot word dot fancy, and the scope selector was word, then oh wait, did I do that wrong? Oh really? Do I have to do it that way? Come on, man. Give a guy a break. Scope name, comma selector. What am I? Oh, derp. That's a different one. Pardon me. The view version of that does it based on the cursor position. That's a whole other thing. I forgot about that. All right. The score for this is 8, but the score for this is, oh wait, sorry. I did that in the wrong order too. Incidentally, this is why I'm working up the bullet point of lists of things to talk about. Oh, I guess that probably would have helped too. This matches that scope, but this one doesn't because this one is too complex. This one has more specificity than this can provide. So the score is 0, doesn't match. If this was word.fancy and we did that, then the score is 16. And if we did it this way, then the score is 8. And essentially, one way to think about this is all the different aspects of the scope are bit positions internally in Sublime. So the more sections that match, the more bits are chosen. I don't think that's 100% accurate. If you look on the issue tracker for the core of Sublime, there's a post that Tom wrote about it because there's some weird eccentricities in it, and he sort of replicated the logic and how it works by observing how it works. So the reason why the color scheme can work this way is because these two things, when combined together, provide a different score. The score of matching word against word is 8, but the score of matching word.fancy against word.fancy is 16. So even though word applies to both of them, word.fancy matches this one, or word, matches that one with a better score, so it gets chosen if there's sort of a, something that could apply to both of them, because word will match word.fancy, but word.fancy matches better. So anything that has, that thing would work in that particular fashion. So given that, what if we didn't want to do this way and we actually wanted, this one to be storage? Oh, sorry. Yeah, we need to find the actual color for storage. My bad. What we would actually be doing essentially is this. And then it ends up still being red anyway because that's where I got that color from. But without hard coding it this way, how could we pull that sort of information out of the current color scheme to be able to write something like this? And this is going to require more coffee. I may have forgotten to put cream in there. So this is one of those things. It seems like sort of a daunting task. All we need is a command that will figure out how what colors to use in color scheme rules so that we could create a file that contains this. But I find when you're working on things that it's, you need to break a task down into smaller, more manageable parts and keep doing that until you hit a part that you know how to do and do that and then build things up from there, right? So let's say we, whoops, yeah, let's shift that down there and get a new plugin, and we'll save it as scope thing, let's say. And we ultimately, what we're gonna try to do is generate out a Sublime color scheme patch file that has sort of the colors that we're interested in, and we can go from there. And once we can generate, given enough information, what the color scheme patch file would look like, then you can get into the aspect of when would we generate a file like this? When a file of a certain type that we're interested in is loaded and there isn't already one of those files there, for example, might be when you want to do that, or once per session. Or you might want to use the settings watch to watch when the color scheme changes and then do it that way. And there's some edge cases in there too, like if there's a syntax specific highlighting color, then you might need to figure that little bit of information out too. But again, that's that sort of thing where don't worry about how you could do that if you can't generate the content that you're actually interested in, right? Um, First thing we might want is something like that. I'm assuming I did that correctly, and I did. And this is a little too tall for our purposes here, so let's do that and clear this out a little bit. And we'll clear that as well. An ordered dictionary is a dictionary that keeps track of the keys in the order that you inserted them in there, which is for the purposes of being able to have the fields in this in a particular order in the file. Incidentally, it's probably obvious if you watch the video on converting color schemes from the old format to the new format, but one of the reasons I think that all of the default color schemes use HSL to define their color variables is because um, Will used the command that he wrote to convert them from the old TM theme format to this format, and it does it that way. And I think the reason there's not an option to go to RGB is strictly because of that whole. It's either really easy to do, and so I'm not sure why you wouldn't do it, or it's probably because HSL is supposed to be something that's a little easier for the mind to grasp, if you will. Not for me. I can totally get behind the idea that the middle value represents how much of the color there is, with none on the left and a whole bunch of it on the right. Saturation, I can wrap my head around. How light a color is, I can totally wrap my head around that too. Knowing that 60 degrees on the color wheel is white, but 32 degrees on the color wheel is orange. No, I find that personally the least intuitive thing ever. And I don't think RGB is intuitive either, but I think you have to be a graphic designer for that, and my mind doesn't work that way. Um, so let's see, how might we do this? Let's say we made this a window command um, so that we don't have to worry about anything like that. We'll call this example command, and we'll even say I'm the example command, like so. And then we don't need that pass anymore. And that works. And if we were to open the user Linux key bindings, then we could even have a binding in here for Control plus Alt plus T to the command example, like so. So that when we push the key, it says, oh crap, I'm using it for that other package. Oh, that's going to be rough. Anyway, that package still works. Let's go ahead and reopen that file, shall we? Right. Yeah, I should have noticed that because it's like right there. Okay. No one said I was an astute observer of the human condition, I don't think. If they did, they were wrong. Incidentally, I totally noticed this earlier. I mentioned it in the Discord. There's a default key binding for wrapping text in a tag, and it uses the insert snippet command to inject a predefined snippet, and the snippet name changed in a recent build, but the key binding didn't. So if you don't add this key binding, that won't work. That's a little something that we need to mention to people. Anyway, that all right. Am I 0 for 2 now? Am I 0 for 2 on this operation? Where is that even coming from? I have more than one plugin with an example command, don't I? Oh, man. All right. I do. That thing from last week is totally still in there. All right. On the whole, this isn't going as smoothly as it could. All right. How about now? Hey, okay. And now this command is going to do something when we run it. Let's say we also, for view in window, oops. View.name equals, no, then we might say view, oh, no, wait a minute. Window dot, now what we're actually doing here is, the last time I played with this, I used a text command and it just replaced the contents of the buffer with the color scheme thing, and that is a bit of a pain. Actually, I'm probably doing way too much work here, because I bet if I was to open a new window and open override audit and view, oops, do that. Oh, that was the file. My bad. We want a little something like this, because this is something, oh yeah, check it out. Window title, content, reuse, clear, syntax. This is from override audit source.lib.output view. All right, let's see if I can remember this all the way over to here. Essentially, this is some code that I wrote for override audit to be able to create these reports and have a command refresh them by doing something like that. The number of packages jumped up one because sample is a package now, and we see it totally has an unknown version. Doesn't have any plugins in it yet. I probably should have put that plugin in there, but that is neither here nor there. So let us go ahead and jump back to this window, paste that in as a reminder to what that thing is, and say, let's see, from override audit .lib .output view import output to view. Does that do a thing? Yeah, it does. Look at me remembering how to import things from other things. And if that was the case, we should be able to say output to view for self.window, and the title is sample color scheme. We wanted to reuse the view. We wanted to clear the view. We want a syntax on this thing. Yeah, I think we do want a syntax on this thing. And the syntax we want is, we don't care about that. We want this one. But we want the syntax and not the color scheme. This is the syntax we want to apply to this color, to this thing, so that it does the business. I guess what we also have to provide is the content. Window, title, content. The content is, say, this. And then syntax equals that, because we want to reuse the window if it already exists. We want to clear it if it's not being reused. Then we want to provide the syntax. We don't need any settings. We're not looking up the current view. I think we'd have to look over here, but I'm pretty sure if it will find the view using maybe the current view to find it. So if there's more than one with the same thing, it'll find the correct one first. But for our purposes here, I think that means we're getting some of that. And the color scheme is correct. There's just not a lot of excitement happening in that thing just yet. Oh yeah, and it ends up being read-only because of course it is. Everything in Override Audit tends to generate into a thing that you shouldn't type in yourself. Unfortunately, I removed that. Oh, I should remove those too. I think I removed that option that someone in the forum asked for. So how might we go about generating this thing? So we might say def generate like so, and we could. This is where we would return the this thing, right? Maybe with a slash in the middle, like so. And then this could be self dot generate like so. And then when we do it, we end up with the same thing, but now it's coming from here. So now we could say syntax equals order dict, and then I think we want to use sublime.decode value to provide no, I think we want encode for this one, don't we? We're going to use Sublime's thing to encode this, and yeah. Encode a JSON compatible value into a string representation. If pretty is set to true, the string will include new lines and indentation. Yeah, we could import the JSON library from Python, but so syntax true. So we still end up with the same thing, even though we're invoking this now. So now we can say, and this is why we had this file open, that say the name of the syntax should be something cool. Well, actually, let's just change the author of this code to be sample plugin, like so. And then, yeah. If we did that, that should be enough to have that popping out. Now, the name field is actually sort of important here, which is something that sort of caught me by surprise. But if I can't remember which color scheme it was I was playing with, but the name field inside of the color scheme thing, at the very least, was used by the conversion routine to give the output file a name different than the name of the input file, which caught me by surprise, but I can't remember what color scheme I was playing with that. There was a part of the video that didn't make it to the channel where I tried to convert a broken color scheme to show that it's broken, and I replaced all of that with that little segment on it would look broken, look in the console, because the video was already pretty long. So now we have a way to generate something like this out. We probably also would be generating rules, right? So we might also say rules is an ordered dict, like so. And then we could say syntax. Oh, sorry, it's actually an array. My bad. It's actually a list, like so. The syntax rules is equal to rules. So now when we generate rules into there, they can appear in the file. And it's okay for that key to be empty. It's just not contributing anything, right? And then we need to figure out what it is that we want to do here. So we need some sort of mapping, if you will. I'm going to get rid of this now. We don't need that. Maybe we'll change the order of that. No, I like it better the other way. Well, we'll do that. Since I have it open over here, let's also do this, because it really bugs me to not have the sort of visual reminders of how things are laid out. It helps me read the code. We're going to need another one of those. because we're going to have a little mapping in here. We might call it scope mapping, right? And it would be a dictionary. Now, the idea here, what we're going to try to do is have a mapping where we have something in our scope list, which in this case is Word and Word.fancy, that maps to a standard scope whose style we want to copy for our own thing here. So we might say that the first thing is Word, and it's going to have some value, and this is going to be Word.fancy, and it's going to have something. And then we could iterate through and pull the information that we need out that way, right? And how might we decide that what we want to do here? We might say that storage is what we want to use for the actual words. That's going to give us a red color, but not that way. And we might want the scope of, let's say, string for fancy words so that they will appear, those things that are currently blue now will be yellow. Maybe we pick a different color for something so that we can definitely tell that it's doing something different there. Anything use orange? Just those, huh? Variable.parameter. There we go. So instead of this, let's say variable.parameter, like so. Now we have a list of scopes. We're going to zoom. Oops. I pushed the wrong key, pardon me. Do that so we can see this a little bit better. And what we need to do in our little generation code here is iterate through our scope mapping, find all of the things that we want to create something with, look to see in the syntax or in the style information what would be colored that color, and then add it as a rule. And I guess for something like that, we would say for scope, comma, selector in scope mapping.items. I think we do something like that. So if I hit this, we see what we expect to see. Okay. Incidentally, I don't know, when I do that, it's just focusing the existing one. So we couldn't close this if we want to, but if we don't, it'll just create the other one. And this, I kind of like using something like this for testing things like this because if it was a previous thing we were doing in here where I just kept ending up with a ton of tabs in the window that you have to remember to close. So now we have the task of figuring out what we're going to map here. So selector is a scope selector that we want to find the style for, right? So what was that thing that we were looking at? It was view.style, right? Nope, sorry, scope, style for scope. We did not even have to do it that way. Oh yeah, you got to provide the scope, like say string. And then it would return some informations for you, which for our purposes is basically we need to know the foreground color and maybe the background color, or maybe bold and italic as well. So we're going to take a copy of that so we can look at it up here in our code while we're doing this. Yeah, good grief. That whole source file thing. Let's redact source column and source file from this list because I personally don't care about that, but that'll give us some nice that. And there could also be a background in there. We could say style equals, oh, we need a view for this one to be able to do something, which makes sense because the color scheme is a view specific. It can be a view specific setting, so it could be different for every tab in the window if you wanted it to be. So we're gonna need a view. So we might say view equals self.window.active view. And just because it's, we'll do it here. Because it's a good idea to do something like this, we might say return self.window.activeView is not none. Pretty sure that can't happen, but I don't want my command to generate any sort of error, so it will only be enabled to run if the window that the command is associated with has an active view. And I'm pretty sure that's just always the case. It can be possible for a view to not have a window, but not the other way around. So now we can say view.style for scope. And the scope we would actually use here is selector. So that actually works now. So now we could actually print style here as well, were we so inclined. And we would see it doing that. Now what happens if you call this thing, I think we end up with the standard foreground color. If I had to guess, this is one of those things that I don't think is documented, but it makes stylistic sense to me that if we were to look at line 27, this is the globals for this, and that's likely the foreground color. As a matter of fact, I guess we could probably just do this thing. Or maybe I could have just typed it, and then we wouldn't have to worry about going all the way back for the thing. View style, like so. The foreground color is in here somewhere. F8, F8, F2, which is exactly what that thing was printing when we did it. So if you do it for a scope that doesn't exist, it gives you style information, which makes 100% sense, right? And this is an example of one of those things where it's not necessarily documented, but sometimes the most logical thing is the thing that happens, and you could, look into it and check. But if the purpose of style for scope is to say, for any given scope, what would it be rendered as? What style would be used to render it? Then it makes perfect sense that this would always return a value because any text in the buffer has a scope and any scope always appears. And the style that it gives you would just be the default foreground color, right? Because remember, in our syntax definition, um, the only reason we're applying these scopes, the only reason that they're colored here is because we added a rule for them. As a matter of fact, we could even go so far as to do this. Now, it's still rendering those. These still have that scope. It looks like it's not rendering it with a color. Technically, we could say it is rendering it with a color. It's just rendering it identical to everything else, so you can't tell that that's what it's doing. But that seems like a, oh, and actually we could even maybe do a little something like this now that I think about it. Yeah, then we can jump up there if we wanted to, so we can actually see it as it's happening. So doesn't get mad about that, huh? No, all right. So given some selector, we can find the scope for this thing and then do something with it, right? So all we have to do is turn that dictionary of a style that we see up there into an actual dictionary in here. And I think the way this normally works is it would have a name, and then it would have a scope, and then it would have a foreground, and then it would have a background, and then it would have font style, roughly in that order. So what if we created a def rule for style like this? Style equals order dict, and then return style like this. And then we could say rules.append self dot. I already forgot what I named the thing. Rule for style. Rule for style, and the style is that. Now, and if we did this now, we end up with two empty rules in there, right? Which makes sense because we haven't actually put anything in it. But now we can put the code for making this look like a correct color scheme thing up here, and this code will look a little bit nicer. So let's go ahead and blop this in here for now. So the first thing we might want to add is a name, let's say. So we could say style name equals something. We haven't actually, don't have that in our little data structure yet. And then everything's always going to have a foreground color no matter what. And I believe we decided that, no, scope first. Right. So we're going to actually need use scope, let's say. So this thing needs to actually provide not only that, but the scope that it should apply, like so. And then when we hit it, it's broken because I can't type. I'm going to shift these all over to here. Oops. All right, it's 3 because that whole, I'm not used to having 3 panels in this configuration and it's kind of messing me up. Let's go like that instead. Okay. So we know that it's going to be scope, then foreground, then background. So if we hit it now, oh yeah, I didn't actually fix that problem, did I? STYLE. We do that and, oh, right. Maybe don't do that because it's not possible yet. So we're getting that part in. Now we're going to need to modify our little data structure to actually carry names for these things. But we have a name, we have a scope, we have a foreground color is equal to style foreground, right? Like so. And yeah, okay. And hit it. And what'd I break now? It's not actually called that in there, is it? Oh, don't do it that way. Oh, yeah. Oh, man, I broke that pretty hardcore. Well, let's change these, shall we? There we go. I hate it when I shadow a variable and don't notice it. Okay, so now we're getting... It really seems to me that as an order dictionary, that should remember it in the other direction. Why is foreground going to the top if that's not how the order that we added the keys in? You know what I mean? It worked great up to there. That's interesting. I'm not sure if that's something I care about in the grand scheme of things, though. If background in style, oops. If there's a background in here, then result background would be equal to style background. But there's not an example of that here. Once again, I have forgotten. Is there one of those in there? Yeah, variable dot parameter. Okay, so that one should actually pop then. Okay. Oh no, wait, sorry, that's invalid was the other one. My bad. Here, we'll make this invalid like this. Invalid sets a background color, so now we can see foreground and background appears in there. Actually, this might be an issue with the order that that pulls things out. Oh. I'm just sort of curious why the order dictionary isn't doing the thing that I would expect to do, but we can see it's populating in a foreground and a background in there, right? So that is pretty much what we want for this, except for the part where they're not in the correct order. So we can, oh, we need maybe a font style. Font style is none. No, let's just make it a list. We could say if bold in style, font style, append bold. That would work, right? Yeah. That would work, right? Okay. And if we were to instead say for style type in bold italic, if style type, oops, in style, then font style dot append style type. Do that, pardon me. Sort of a nicer way of accumulating those lines. You could actually probably even get this down with a little bit of extra hackery. We probably would want this to be the actual value and not a string so that it's not incorrect though. If font style, then result font style be equal to space dot join of font style. And I'm pretty sure that we end up with bold and italic for whatever rule we're using to pull word, which is variable dot parameter. That's this one. And view dot style for scope. Whoop. Dot. We'll do a little bit of that sort of action there. Bold, false, boop, boop. This seems to think it's italic, but not bold. So how did that end up with both of them all the time? Clearly it's ending up with both of them in there. Oh, right. It's not if the key is there or not, if the key is a value. I can see it right here. This is the reason I posted that there. So the key should definitely just always be in there. So we would actually say if style style type. This is probably a smarter way to do it. There we go. That one's just italic and nothing else. So all that leaves us wondering why these are going in that order, and it might have something to do with the way we're actually doing that. So I guess we might do something like this and return dumps syntax indent equals 4. Name, scope, foreground, font style. Okay, so Sublime, the way Sublime iterates the dictionary doesn't preserve the order, but the one built into Sublime into Python does. That makes sense. So now we're actually generating something that looks like it would be what we want, right? And that means we need to move on to the next part of this. Whatever, well, we can remove this because we don't need it any longer. And right now, we're outputting to a view the value of that. But when we call self.generate, we're ending up with a string that represents the color scheme that we're interested in. So let's actually say we might want to make this a little bit nicer. We might want this to be, oops, a dictionary. We might want that to be a dictionary. Actually, maybe we want to do that this way. And then things will be a little bit nicer. And then we could say there, 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 there. Oh, yeah, that one's totally wrecking it, isn't it? We do a little bit of that. And then we could say here, this is the selector. And we need a name, like so. So we end up with this little dictionary where the keys are the scopes we want to create rules for, and then we have a scope rule. So we could say regular words goes in this one, and fancy words goes into this one. And then our code will break now because it's not doing the right thing, because it's expecting when it does this generate business for this to be a selector, and we might need this to be info. And then this would be info for selector, because that's, oh, I'm really bad at that tonight. That will pull that out, and this would be info to be passed to rule for style. So in rule for style, instead of using use scope, we could say rule, oh, we'll just call it info. That was that second argument, right? Yeah. And now, the thing that we were getting out of there was use scope. That's just that one. So the scope. Oh, wait a minute. That one should be style and then info. My bad. Yeah. The scope to actually apply, and then the other information that we need. So the generate, the rule for style. What's the self-style info? There we go. That's what I expected that to be. Oh wait, use. This was shoot. No, it wasn't. Use scope. I'm usually better at refactoring like this. Okay, so we're passing in the actual style that should be used in the thing, and then this should be, that one was scope before. I've already lost track of what I did. Does anybody remember what it was that I did? Oh, good grief. Okay, that'll still be doing something. Whoops. All right, so we got that doing more or less the same thing, but instead of this, we would use something like info name. My instincts on that were more correct than I would have thought. Okay, there we go. Regular words, use the scope word and that foreground color and that. And I can't remember if you can add your own custom keys to that. One of the things that would be nice here would be to have a comment written as a part of this output that says what scope it originally came from. But I don't think you can represent that information. So you'd sort of have to generate this yourself, which involves replicating JSON dump-s. So that's probably not as great as all that. So this thing gets past the style that it should actually be using. Yeah. the actual style to use, what scope it's for, and the info. And actually, do we even need that anymore? Because that was the key, wasn't it? I think that was the key. Whoops. In any case, we got that doing what we want. So now we can move on to actually writing this into something. So we're going to need a little bit more information to know what it is that we want to do here. We need the color scheme that's in use in any given view to be able to do this, right? So that we know what the name of this thing should actually be. And this is where it gets mildly complicated. Um, we're gonna say color scheme data is self.generate. Let's say. Hello, welcome back, Ashwin. You didn't miss much, just a lot of fumbling around. What sort of lecture were you attending? That still works. And let's say we also need yeah, pardon me while I itch my ear a little bit. One thing we want to pull in here is the name of, okay, we no longer officially need that. Close that for the time being. Sample color scheme is the thing we're creating right now, so that's okay. Our syntax, yeah, we'll keep that over here. There's the file we're actually trying to do something with. So let's say we need a name and we want to pull it from whatever. Oh, yeah. We would need to actually load the color scheme file to be able to pull that. So we're not going to do that, but we do need to know the name of the color scheme that is in use. And we can get that by saying view settings get color scheme. Thusly is going to give us that information. Incidentally, I don't think I mentioned it in the video, but Sublime Color Scheme doesn't need to have the package name in it, like packages, blah, 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 because Sublime, when it's using a Sublime color scheme, Sublime is loading all of the color schemes with the same name and sticking them together. So it does more work internally. But when you're using a TM theme version file, you do have to do that. And I think that's why the item in the preferences menu that changes the color scheme always uses the full name just for safety's sake. Ooh, an undergrad in mechanical engineering. You probably know all sorts of, you know, stuff that I, wish I knew. Like when I spent like 10 minutes over Christmas trying to figure out how to get the battery door off of some battery operated Christmas lights because it looked like it should slide forward and then pop off, but it did not want to move. Are you interested in software development as well, or computer science, or is working in Sublime just sort of a hobby? For me, it's both. I am a software developer by trade and have been since 1999. So a really long time because I'm an old fogey, but I have been a computer programmer since I was in grade 5, which was somewhere around 1979 or so. So I do it for work and I do it for fun. And when I have weird bugs, I wonder why I think either of those things is a particularly good idea. Let's just check over here for a second. That still seems to be thinking like it's going well. Okay. Cool, cool. Scroll that up a little bit. Oh, actually, before I continue on here, I need to do a little something like that. There we go. All else being equal, An item that just says toggle isn't necessarily great if there's no immediate way to tell if it actually did anything or not. Like in Sublime, you can toggle the menu open and closed, and you can actually see it going away. But the YouTube chat's having a toggle timestamp, but not showing you um, what exactly, uh, whether they're turned on or not. It makes it really hard to know if it's actually displaying things or not. Um, Does that work out well in the? Yeah, interesting. I don't tend to work. Sometimes I work in distraction-free mode, but more often than not, I maximize Windows anyway, so I don't intend to work in the full screen mode. But it can be pretty useful from time to time. But where were we in this whole operation? We want to drop the name. We want to take the information that we're generating here and put it into a file named after the color scheme that's currently in use in, I guess, the currently active view. And we want to store it into our user package. Um, so first things first, don't do it that way. That is, I do Sublime as a hobby and have been learning. Ooh. I do use Sublime at work. Actually, I started working at the company that I work at now, which is the only company that I've worked at professionally, in December of 1999. And from 1999 all the way up to mid 2016, when I went looking for a replacement for JetBrains tools that I was using, I pretty much used only Vim for 100% of all of my work related things and 95% of home development, hobby development, or whatever you like to call it. I spent a while working in Java, just as part of my whole game development thing that I did for a while. I was using Java for game development, and I've long been of the opinion that Java is complicated and irritating enough that you probably want an IDE for that, because there's just so much crap that needs to go on with file name layouts and everything. So I was using IntelliJ for that, and as a result of having that, I also played a little bit with using WebStorm for web things when I was working a little bit in HTML5 game development, but they were ridiculously big, slow, clunky, and awful. And whenever I wanted to configure something, people complain about Sublime and how its configuration system is a file that you have to edit. In JetBrains, it's one of those things that's so complicated that there has to be a find button in the preferences panel for you to narrow down where in the giant list of fold out trees the thing you're looking for might actually exist. And even then, I still had issues with it. I could never get it to format code or color code the way I wanted, which was irritating. There were like 3 or 4 bugs that really impinged on my ability to work, but the development scheme for IntelliJ and JetBrains in general is that they, probably rightly so, order bugs to be fixed based on user votes. So if you discover a problem that is a huge workflow no-no for you, but a bunch of other people aren't already hitting that, then the chances of you seeing your bug fixed are nil, because they're prioritizing other facing bugs instead. And so I just sort of gave up on them completely and went looking for something else, found Sublime, and pretty much I use Sublime 100% of the time now. I use it at work, I use it at home, I use it when I'm helping people on the forum using Sublime. Um, Currently, I'm the only person in the whole of a large web development project that's using Sublime instead of Visual Studio Code, because I can't bring myself to use it. It's just not good as far as I'm concerned. I also tried to use Atom very briefly first, before Sublime, even as a matter of fact. But I installed Atom, ran it for like 15 minutes, thought, hey, that's neat. And then I quit it and thought, oh, wait, there's something I wanted to check. And then I realized that it had installed, but it didn't put an icon anywhere on the desktop, in the start menu, no application shortcuts. Spent a long time trying to figure out where it was, and in the end, I had to actually install it a second time to get it to install an application shortcut so I could start it. And that was pretty much the end of using Atom. And I've used Visual Studio Code just enough to take the screenshots I needed for some documentation I was writing, and then I gave up on it as well. Sublime is just too fast and too configurable to be fooling around with that stuff. And one of the more important aspects actually for me was, at the time I was using Linux, and I use Slackware as my Linux distribution, and it's one of those, unlike Ubuntu and other ones that have the large package repository and practically anything you want, you can just use the package manager to find the package and install it. Slackware doesn't work that way. Generally on Slackware, if you want something, you have to find a binary distribution or you have to compile it yourself. And anything that is Electron related that you have to compile yourself, you'd probably shoot yourself in the head. It's ridiculously tricky to compile and slow, and so Visual Studio Code was a complete, I'm not even going to be looking into that for Linux, and ditto Atom for the same reason. Um, Surprisingly, Discord works not too shabby now. It's an Electron app as well. That one I had the impetus to actually power through building it and getting it working. Um, there is also some other issues with the machine I was running being 32-bit and everything else needing to be 64-bit, because I was the last person in the company that was maintaining compatibility with versions of the software that we had out there in case anybody had any problems. And once we migrated all the clients to 64-bit, I was able to upgrade my system, which is good because it happened right at the time that Sublime Merge went into its closed beta, and I got selected to be in the private closed beta for that before it came out, and Sublime Merge is 64-bit only, so got in just under the wire on that one. How are we doing over here? We're almost running out of time for this particular stream, but I would like to see this actually doing something before we go. So we're gonna say, yeah, I imagine that Visual Studio, VS Code seems to be really great for web stuff. Based on how everybody else in the team is using it. Um, I just, I guess one of the issues I have sort of is that I don't necessarily like IDE type environments. I like the idea that Sublime is more of a text editor that I can add functionality to than the whole IDE-ness of things, except for Java because of that. And I guess WebStorm was probably, it was not too shabby in that regard. One of the issues I had with WebStorm, as a matter of fact, is that their syntax highlighting engine for TypeScript was so broken that it wouldn't even correctly syntax highlight the sample TypeScript code that you see in their documentation. And if you went to the TypeScript page, there's like a sample little applications that show you how to use the various parts of the language. Their their smart and code intelligence tools would flag it as reusing classes that weren't being reused, and stuff like that. And that sort of put me off of using it as well. Um, so let's say we quickly make a method for color scheme name. So I'm not sure what point you had to leave, but basically we've got this code here that is taking information like we want to apply a syntax highlighting rule for Word and Word.fancy, and we want it to be based on the user's syntax highlighting for these scopes. These are the names they're going to be. This is what we're actually managing to generate out. for the purposes of we want to be able to syntax highlight this sample syntax we created here so that the words in this sentence and some of the ones up there would syntax highlight based on these, but without having to manually create the file. Because if we were doing something like an actual plugin thing here, we could say that whenever plugin loaded happens, run this thing to generate a color scheme patch, and then our files will just automatically always work for a user, even though we're using scopes that aren't technically valid, where validity means in the list of recommended scope guidelines, which there's a variety of reasons that you might not do that. If your language doesn't really fall into any of those, would be one. So we're going to return something as string. Now what we need here is a package name. Let's say a view. What if we did this here instead? Because I think that should work just fine. And we should say color scheme name is equal to, oh shoot, file name is equal to color scheme name for self. Oh wait, where was I doing that? Self.window.activeView. Yeah, like so. So if you do that, we still see it saying that. So name is a Python thing that gives you the module name for the current file, which in this case is the package user and a file name scope thing. So split on the character that and get the first one, I think is what we would do to figure out the package. Whoops. So if we knew that the package name, and we're going to have to flip this plugin into a different directory before I actually do this, or I'm going to blow away my own file, so I got to be careful about that, is going to be this. So we need to have that information. And then we need to know the scheme name. So would be equal to get this view, ask it for its settings object, ask the settings object to get the color scheme thing, and we'll print scheme here just to see that when we do that, it prints monokai.sublime color scheme. Actually, let's go ahead and move this file down to the sample package. Yes, move here. Okay, and it unloaded user scope thing and reloaded it in that one. So that should have no effect on anything except that if we print package name and scheme in here, we'll see it's in the package sample and monokai.sublime color scheme. Okay, because we're going to write a file in a second and I have a monokai.sublime color scheme in my user package, I don't want to do that. Now we have the color scheme name. Now for our purposes here, that's actually just fully what we want, but view settings dot set, and the color scheme could be, actually I guess the easiest way to do this is UI select, whoops, select color scheme, blind ourselves, and then go with Monokai and hit enter. And I think that would, yeah. The UI command sets in a thing that is a full package resource, but we don't, you don't have to do that. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. I think you definitely need it for TM theme color schemes, but you don't need it for Sublime color schemes. So it's possible for that to be there. Now, something else to note, and I'm not sure if this has come up in a stream before, but this is an example of a package resource name. Package resource names are always in the format of that / there. That might have come up in a video on the other channel, I am not sure. But this is true even on Windows where the path separator is a / and not a / like it is here. Resource names are always using that. So one might wonder, what is the result of this? An item with that. Okay, because we're going to always want the last item in one of these things, because for the purposes of generating a file, we want it to always be the name of that thing. So dot split on that, which is always going to be that character even on Windows, so that's always correct, and get the -1, and we end up with sample monokai.sublime color scheme. And then we need to pop up to the top of this file and we'll maybe import OS like so. Pop down to here and say res name is equal to os path dot join for sublime dot packages path, because we want a file that is rooted in the packages path, specifically in a folder named after our package and specifically with the scheme name. And then if we printed res name like so and actually returned it, that's safe, then we can see that the file this is going to generate is in the packages file for sample named that. Okay, now we're getting close to the part where we say, watch this, and hope for the best. We're going to take that up for the time being. So we'll say this, return a fully qualified path to the name of a patch color scheme file for the color scheme in use in the given view, like so. And now what we're going to do here is comment out this. So we're going to get the name of a color scheme. Well, let's say we get the color scheme data, and then we say with open file name. Whoops. No, it's not. Yeah, I guess we'll do that way. Write text as handle handle.write color scheme data. Like so. So in theory, when we run this command, it's going to generate the color scheme information, which looks like this. And it's going to create a file with a name that looks like this, write that into it. And it's not going to do the thing it was doing before anymore. So that means when I push this key, we should see syntax highlighting spring into existence in here based on the scopes that we put over here. So one of these words, the regular word, should be orange, and the other ones should be yellow. And also, I think the orange one should be italicized too. So let's see what happens. That's unfortunate, because it really seems like that should have done something. Oh, wait. Maybe I didn't push the right key. Check that business out. Okay, now I'm sort of paranoid that it worked the way that it did. But, wow. That is totally some italicization there. Word.fancy. Let's go ahead and check what we were, we don't need that anymore. The sample color scheme, fancy words. Fancy words aren't supposed to be italicized. But it looks to me like they are. That could just be this font though. Nope. That's definitely changing the style of the F. Well, I guess the only thing to do is view package file for sample Monokai, right? Regular words have the scope word and are italic. Well, is that what this said? Fancy words don't have it. Yeah, but this is a fancy word, isn't it? Fancy words are italic and regular words aren't. In the world of the confused, welcome to me. I'm sure there's probably something really obvious that I've fiddled here. Now I can't, is this the unwritable one? Yeah, okay. So this is the file that was actually created. Let's go ahead and, whoops, move that down so we can see it there. Definitely see it reloading that file when it happens. So why are regular words coming out as italic? Variable.parameter. Do I have, maybe this actually, wait a minute, no. Okay, let's just quadruple check this because this is kind of confusing. This is the scope word.fancy, and fancy words, as seen here, do not have a font style of italic, but they are the color of strings, which is this. That's interesting, and I have a feeling it might be pulling this one because that one also applies. That's neat. Huh. Well, I just learned something. Unless that's part of the color scheme documentation in which I just remembered something. But it's totally picking up the font style for Word, which is italic, because this is Word, but it is a fancy word, so it's got other extra things applied on top of it. I think that means that if the background was a different color, fancy words don't change. I'm not entirely convinced that that's actually how that's supposed to work, all things being equal. Let's go ahead and quit that really quickly and pop into the other version. Oh yeah, also let's check this out. Override Audit version 2.2 is officially out as of 1 hour ago. You now have the powers that I have. We'll go ahead and do a little bit of that. And oh no. That is. All right, so if I remove this line, font style is inherited even in this version. That's interesting. Well, there you go. I'm going to have to check into that. So let's go ahead and quit that and pop back into, well, we're going to go ahead and close that. Since we're in the vicinity of this, bum, bum, bum. Font style. 0 or more of bold italics separated by spaces. Yeah, all right, well, that is something to bring up, I suppose. In any case, that is, I guess, if that's how that is going to work for us, then we want to fix this, like so. So when I push the key, those go back the other way. Only these ones are italic. Those ones are not. All right, and we can see it updated down there. So there we go. So what we have here is a command I'm personally running manually, and it is generating this content for us. So if I was to do this and save, we can see that's that. So imagine we had a package, a plugin, something that was opening a file of a type of a syntax that we've created that we know it's going to have problem syntax highlighting, or you have created a view in a panel down like one of these ones, like SFTP's output panel. And this is just a view like anything else, except that it's down here referenced by a view name instead of being associated with a file. And we wanted that view to have color scheme rules that apply to scopes that we've come up with. Then we could use an onload event listener, or in the case of whatever created this panel, could also just manually invoke a command like this to generate a color scheme in the package of the actual thing that has rules that allow our syntax or to do this. And another reason why you might want to do this is if you wanted to say something like view.add_regions test, and then you needed to pass in a region like sublime.region 110, and you wanted to pass it a scope like word.fancy, and maybe we might finish that up like so. To be able to do that, if these rules didn't exist, then see that ends up being white because this is a scope that does not exist. And anything that doesn't have a specific scope matched by the color scheme ends up being the foreground color. So if you wanted to do something like this, or I think you can even do something like that. Oh, shoot. I was in the wrong file. Let's go ahead and we'll close that and reopen it so that's not the case. If you wanted to have a region in here that was a specific color, or you wanted to have a dot of a specific color, or if you wanted to have a cross of a specific color, this theme doesn't have one, which is interesting because I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be there. And I'm not sure if that comes across in the stream or not, but anytime a theme references an image that doesn't exist, you get that weird stripy texture to let you know that there's definitely something amiss. This isn't how I generate syntax highlighting for reports currently. No, the syntax that I use for reports and things of that nature just has standard Sublime scopes that are more or less the color that I want, but I'm looking for something like this for that and for HyperHelp itself for similar reasons, because it seems a lot nicer. And this is, as I said earlier, something that used to be harder to do before because you'd have to actually look at, well, for one thing, in the old days, color schemes were TM theme. TM theme is XML. Working with XML is more, not impossible, but more tricky than working with JSON in Python, because a JSON object just appears to be a standard dictionary for all intents and purposes, right? But for XML, you need to use like XPath and find nodes and elements and things of that nature. And TM themes aren't a nice key equals value. There's a tag that tells you that the name of the key, and then there's another set of tags to tell you the value for that key. So, it takes two tags just to tell you the name and scope, and then another one for the actual content. So actually looking at color scheme files is kind of a pain in the butt in that case if you're using TM theme, and you'd have to actually load that TM theme information in and parse it to be able to find something like we're doing here, to be able to say, I would like to create a color scheme that uses whatever color strings are, because if someone has a color scheme that's being laid out by a designer, then this is something that's sort of but not quite string like. I want that to be the color. You'd have to parse the XML to do that. The two things that make this a lot nicer in recent versions of Sublime is we can create these small little patch files that have just rules that we need, or just global colors that we might want to tweak, or we can even change variables as well, and they just apply on top. And they're JSON so that they're easier to work with. So it's a lot easier now. And also these APIs that we're using here for actually asking Sublime, hey, when you actually render out um, a string, what's the style information you're using for that? Then you don't even have to parse. Like we could, if we wanted to, we have the ability up in this code here to actually get the color scheme. And if it had the full name like it did here, when we used that thing to change the setting, we can load this easily. We can see right here, this is how you would create the name of the thing, right? But you'd probably do it with the actual color scheme name instead of throwing parts off. You could actually get that and you could load that string in if you wanted to, and you could parse it if you wanted to, but we can just ask Sublime. So those are the things that make this a lot nicer. It does require that, and it's not something that happens here. If our sample package was distributed as a Sublime package file, which packages generally are where possible, because it makes it easier to modify them by using overrides, otherwise you can't do that, then this won't work without us trying to create the directory that we're about to write the file in, because the very first time that you use this, there wouldn't be a folder named sample in the packages folder. You'd have to create it first, right? Technically, you could, like I said, you could write this into the user package, but I'll tell you right now, if anybody writes a plugin that does something like this that says the current color scheme is Monokai, I'm going to go ahead and write a patch file named Monokai into the user package. I will hunt that person down and I will slap them repeatedly in the face with a fish, because I have my own version of this in my user package already for, as we've seen, to do things like add the glow to Python entities that I'm using here, and these things that I've added to my color scheme so that various things in HyperHelp highlight a little bit nicer for me. So you definitely don't want to write something like this into the user package unless you want people to be very angry with you that you've clobbered their files. You could, of course, check to see if the file is there, but then what do you do if it is? You can't create the file, right? But if you're a file named Bob, you have all the right in the world to write stuff into a folder named Bob. Theoretically, a person might get a little angry about that, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. I don't think any of these. An example of a package that does this is Sublimerge, by the way. It comes as a Sublime package file, and then it extracts a large portion of itself into the packages folder and does things like create color schemes. It's an actual example of something that does this. So this is definitely on the radar for this and for HyperHelp as well. I have done this. If you look on the channel in the playlist, there's Livestream 6. I did something very similar to this way back then, and it went a lot better because I actually had a little outline I was looking at, and tonight I was just sort of a little scatterbrained. I got a lot of stuff going on, but uh, I think this is more or less the same sort of action there. As a matter of fact, I know for a fact I had a bug when I wrote this part right here. I had the two things in reverse order and spent a little while trying to figure out what the hell was going on there. Now, what would actually be nice with this is to actually be able to, instead of use these hex codes, use these variables, right? Because if we could, instead of doing this, if we could get this information, then we end up with the same color ultimately, but if the user modifies var white, our color scheme would continue to work. Whereas in this case, the colors here are sort of locked in based at the point at which I pushed the key or we run the command. And if the color scheme variables change, then these no longer apply and they'd be out of date. But by the same token, if the user decided they didn't want to use Monokai anymore and they wanted to use something else, then there wouldn't even be a file there unless we also did some checking. So there's still a little bit more work that has to happen there. But I have gone on for quite a bit longer than I intended to on this particular one. So I think we're going to call it there. And I'm not sure. Again, I want to work more on HyperHelp in upcoming streams. Um, let's go ahead and do a little something like this before we go, shall we? I want to get a little more work into HyperHelp. There's a couple of things I want to do, and one of them is change it from being something that bootstraps a package out of its own dependency into HyperHelp being an actual package that override or that the HyperHelp core dependency will install for you by downloading it from the internet or something along those lines. That's stuff I can't do just yet because I don't want to fiddle with the dependency portion of the package at all until Will finalizes how package control is going to handle dependencies in the newer versions because those things are going to change a little bit. But I think there are a couple of things I wanted to tweak in there. Something I can't remember it off the top of my head. Definitely, Snappy could use a little bit of work bringing help up, but by the same token, I don't want to do too much there because official documentation is going to change. So we might end up working in override audit for the next few streams upcoming. I want to get more work done on the functionality that I've been working on, not this year yet, but back before November started, for being able to generate patches for overrides so that you could change a package and then just share your changes with somebody and have them apply. And there's streams on that in the archive. I have the ability to generate the things. I don't have the ability to apply them yet, and that one's kind of spooky. But until then, if you have any ideas for topics that you'd like to see in a live stream, if there's an example of a plugin that you'd like to walk through creating an example of, go ahead and drop that down into the comments section below this particular video, or really any video on this channel or the other channel, which you should subscribe to if you're not already subscribed, because we're doing a video series over there on color schemes. And then coming real soon now is the start of the package dev videos, whose length may be subject to being longer. I haven't quite decided how I want to work all of that yet. Um, but I think that we're going to go ahead and call that there. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to, like the video if you're finding it useful. And until the next stream, this is a very tired OdatNurd asking you to please have a sublime day.